Let's see what happens. All right, I see our faces. I see our voices. I hear our voices. I guess I
Oh,
don't
good.
see our voices, do I? It's early. It's a Monday. What are you gonna do? Well, good afternoon, Mark Richards, SSA. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. I'm good. Actually, for the start of the week, surprisingly good.
Well, I think your temperatures are getting a little warmer like mine. I actually can see road again, which is nice. I missed
Wow.
that. There usually our roads around here get so covered, they don't plow fast, they get tamped down, and so I can actually see pavement again, which is a huge win. But anyhow, well, welcome, my friend. Thank you for hanging out with me for a little bit here today.
Yeah, this is
For
gonna be
the
fun.
rare person who doesn't know who you are, why don't you give us your bio? How you came to know me, why you're even here.
You bet. Yes, I have been in the industry for 36 years, 26 as a software architect. And about the past 6 years, I've pretty much devoted most of my career to microservices, basically helping companies move from monoliths or even greenfield applications. But I've had a great career as a developer, tons of programming languages, lots of fun. And as a matter of fact, the past 26 years as a software architect, even more fun. I mean, I'm passionate about this stuff. But about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I guess, 10 years ago, I went independent. And so that was one a big move. I've always been a consultant, but I always kind of worked for consulting firms, drawing a salary and stuff. And I did decide to launch on my own, and boy, I am glad I did. It's been a great ride since then. But about I don't know, maybe 4 years ago, I started to realize that even though I still do gigs and still code, that you know I wasn't doing. I have so much knowledge and so many things to tell people about, and I wasn't really serving the industry well. Kind of being like stuck in a team as an individual contributor, and I
Sure.
realized that spreading that knowledge is not only more valuable, but what I was kind of interested in doing. So I've been doing a lot more training, a lot more conferences, stuff like that in the past 4 years, and kind of shifting that balance of, let's say, a 70-30 from consulting training to really training consulting. And I've
Sure.
been really enjoying that. Not so much this past year, as you know, but
Well, it's been an adjustment for all of us, to say the
yeah,
least. There's no
yeah,
getting around that. I make no bones about the purpose of this Twitch stream for me is a chance to hang out with my friends because we don't get to do that. Normally by now you and I would have been at least one or two places together and had a coffee or dinner or something. And I miss that. I desperately miss
yeah,
that. So we do everything we can to try to recreate that for at least an hour ish on a random Monday. But I
absolutely.
was thinking about this earlier today, and I have some theories, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. There feels like there's been a real renaissance in software architecture. That 5, 10, 15 years ago, yeah, there were architects, but it just seems like there's been this explosion of people being interested in it, wanting to be trained on it, read about it, etc. Why do you think we've seen that sort of resurgence in this space?
Yeah. Well, you're right, Nate. We certainly have. As a matter of fact, that bubble, I'm not sure whether it was about 4 years ago, maybe a little, plus or minus one, that companies started to realize we need to focus on architecture.
Hmm.
Uh, that drive, I think, was more about understanding uh, the structure of an application and companies needing to really move and readjust in a certain direction just due to this volatile marketplace that we have. And businesses are learning how to turn on a dime from the business perspective, new products, new services, changing the kind of services they do. But the problem's really always been IT always lags behind in that.
Hmm.
And a large part of that is due to the architecture, specifically, for example, monolithic systems, or even the adoption of service-oriented architecture, which was great at the start until we realized you really can't change anything once you have it in there, right? And it's like, right.
Wait, you
So
mean having this really hard form schema is a problem? Wow, I never would have
Well,
guessed that.
well, especially when you basically put a majority of your business processes in a very large enterprise service bus and then spin it up and watch it fall. And
What could possibly go wrong? A single point of failure? No, that's never an issue.
listen, hold my beer. Let me stand up an ESB. But I think also more companies adopting agile has
Sure.
actually created that awareness that what you're speaking about this. We should pay more attention to this renaissance about architecture, because traditionally, yeah, we've been doing architecture for 40 years, 4 decades.
Yeah.
Well, 40 years or 4 decades, whichever one you want to choose. I almost said 40 decades, and that's not
Nah, we
quite
haven't been doing it that long.
yeah, building architecture, yes, but not software. But the point is, it's always, as you know, Nate, been so prescriptive and so ivory tower,
Right.
and that just doesn't work anymore. And I think this has actually created an awareness to understand what architecture is, why it's important, and how it can actually facilitate the business needs like agility or time to market, or even I'll go as far as to say competitive advantage in the
Right.
marketplace. Architecture is about half of that.
Hmm.
So I'm excited about this awareness because us architects, we've been spending so long trying to defend our
Yes.
job, our
Yes.
positions. Like, you need an architect. No, we don't. It's like, yes, you do.
Well, I think part of it from my perspective is, you're hitting a lot of the themes that I hit in my head. Imagine that. I mean, we steep in a lot of the same stuff, but companies are realizing that your technology isn't a cost center anymore. You are a technology company, whether it's convenient or not. And so you have to respect that. And part of that is realizing your people are going to make architectural decisions. Hopefully they're making good ones. It doesn't matter what your title is. So having some people who have that focus and have that viewpoint ends up being pretty darn useful. And so I think it's a realization that we've had a lot of projects fail. Hey, maybe if we had some, for lack of a better word, adult supervision, that might actually be a good thing.
Mhm.
Plus, I think the applications are just getting so complicated now. You could
Well,
get by without it if it was five of us banging away on a big monolith, but you've got now distributed teams, distributed applications. You can't afford for it to just accidentally be an architecture. There has to be some forethought there.
yeah. Well, and also cohesion, integration, all of these things are increasing. You're right, because of the complexity
Yeah.
involved. And, as a matter of fact, I was just talking on a prior podcast last week about the issue of all this complexity, and the question was, what gets me excited in the industry? What gets me excited in architecture right now? And a lot, first of all. However, I can really narrow it down to the things that I really love and are really passionate about are the whole umbrella of reactive architecture,
Sure.
reactive systems, creating those self-configuring, self-healing, self-learning, self-adjusting kind of systems that uh, things are getting too complicated. Nate. And
So you want to build Skynet? Hang on a sec here. I just watched Terminator 2 over the weekend. I don't know if I'm ready for Skynet.
well, I'm going to start with Hal from Space Odyssey
I can't let you
first.
do that, Mark.
Let's start a little lower in the thing, but yeah, these are the things I'm really excited about. I've worked on several of these kinds of systems, and I see that it can be done. Simple machine learning algorithms, and the interest of MLAI is such a great topic. It's such a great thing to look at. A lot of people unfortunately say, well, I don't do robotics, right?
Sure.
Not into that kind. It's like, neither am I.
Right.
And I am just fascinated. I read everything I can about it because I like the fact of applying this to business applications. Dropping in an application or a tool and having it look around, learn about its environment, and start adjusting and tuning and optimizing itself based on that specific environment without any human intervention. I mean, we're getting a glimpse, Nate, of the future of architecture. And I'm getting on in age, as you can see from my hair.
You're a
So
literal
chances
graybeard.
Yes, indeed. However, my of course my body is this age, but my mind is still at a 23-year-old. Well, from
Is
many
that a way of
aspects,
saying you're
immaturity.
immature? I think that's really what you're saying there. And Knowing you as well as I do, I agree. You are.
I like to have fun. I enjoy life, but also I wish, though, physically I was that much younger because this is exactly what I would drop everything for on a dime and
Sure.
just soak 100% of my time in.
I just finished an interesting book, and I'm going to mangle the title, but from Bach to Bacteria and back again, all talking about sort of the evolution of the mind and what does that look like. And there was one interesting sort of thing that I think about when you make this comment. We're starting to get systems now where we don't know how they came to the conclusion that they came to. And what happens when we
Yeah.
lose that visibility into what the system is doing? We all know how a calculator works when you do multiplication, addition, and we can all work it out on paper if we have to. But you've got some of these systems now, you think like diagnostic systems that are more accurate than a human at finding some of these weird edge cases. And we don't necessarily know how it is that this system determined that you have this disease or this cancer or reading your report. How should we feel about that? I mean, is this like an engine where I don't know how my engine in my truck works, but it works. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? I mean, where might that lead? We talk Skynet and HAL, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah. Oh, and so many, the Kraken Project. That's what it was. There was a great book by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. I love their books. And this is not one of the Pendergast series books, but rather, kind of a one-off from that called the Kraken Project, K-R-A, crack K-E-N. Anyways, it's exactly about this, Nate. It's like developers write code, that code writes code. In other words, you write the base code, that's the thinking engine. And then that thinking engine develops its own software to figure out problems. Anyways, as you can guess, during a test, something goes terribly, terribly wrong.
No
And
one could have
to
predicted
your
this.
never could have predicted that, and it's a really cool book. But to your point, though, you're right. Even in that book, but could even be reality. Uh, it's complex. That's why
Right.
we have thinking machines. But I'm curious, though, is the reason why you're interested in knowing how you arrived at that answer is to understand it or to control it? You
Sure.
see, there's two angles that we can come at with this. But I agree, our human nature is to understand. That's why we send probes to Mars and all this is just to seek an understanding of how things work.
Well, and
So
to be fair, Mark, there's plenty of instances in our own lives where we make some of those intuitive leaps and we don't even understand why we do it. I knew that was the right answer. How'd you know? I don't know. I mean, there's all sorts of interesting examples along that line where, I remember one story about radar operators during the first Gulf War who had to tell the difference between a low flying Scud missile coming at the carrier group versus no, that's one of our aircraft coming back. Because if
yeah.
it's the aircraft and we shoot it down, that's bad. If it's a Scud missile and we don't shoot it down, that's bad. And yet, for some reason, the humans actually did a pretty good job of figuring out when it was which or the other. And they tried to ask them how, and they're like, I don't know. I just knew. So I don't know. Maybe it's just an overblown. Maybe I've watched too much sci-fi. Maybe that's the problem.
Well, you've read Daniel Suarez's book,
Of course.
Kill Decision. Was it Kill
Yes.
Decision? I think was what it was with the drone that tried to do that. But yes, it's. But it's kind of like Nate, our human brains.
Yeah.
We barely scratched the surface of an understanding of how our brains work. And if we're going to be glimpsing into the future of software and
Right.
we're thinking about these possibilities of actually developers writing code that then writes its own code based on certain conditions and situations,
It's just code all
um,
the way down.
it's going to be code all the way down. And I'm guessing we will probably, like our human brains, lose a little bit of understanding about why certain situation happened or why certain code was even generated.
Sure.
You know,
Sure.
it's interesting. Boy, I love this. You're right. It's like science fiction stuff, but I'll tell you, when we're get off my lawn kind of times in another couple of years,
I used to have to
maybe.
code with a keyboard. I didn't have code that wrote code. Kids these days.
Well, you laugh, Nate, but um, with with my kids, I was describing something to them. I think it was a telephone booth or something. They're like, "You're
Sure.
serious? You mean you just walk down the street?" And it was some sort of interface like that. And I was thinking that exact thing. I'm thinking, our kids are going to laugh their heads off at the fact that we actually had input devices,
Right.
physical input devices to computers.
Right.
But what that will be is the fascinating question. You know.
I think I talked about this with Mark Heckler last week. Maybe I'm just imagining this, but I've thought about that where, my son just turned 14 yesterday, and so he undoubtedly will learn how to drive, will get his driver's license. But I wonder if his kids will, or if his kids, a driver's license will be like a pilot's license is today, where it's something that hobbyists get, but the vast majority is like, why would you bother? I just, I press a button, a car shows up and it takes me someplace.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. Well, we have some folks in our wonderful chat channel here. So I first have to say hello, Sweet Color 9. Good to see you as always. And you'll appreciate this. He apparently was watching one of your recent O'Reilly sessions, and he wants to say it depends, and then says I need to order a shirt with that statement. To which I was going to say Mark already has that shirt.
Yes, I do. I wore it during one of my classes last week, as
Yes,
a matter of
yes.
fact.
I'm pretty sure you wore it when you lectured for my grad students last fall, if my memory serves.
I
But
believe so.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, it is the answer. I'm sorry. And then I want to say good afternoon to Mr. Gibb. Always good to see you, Master Gibb. And then let's see here. RSPINU. I don't know. See, it's so hard to like not know how to pronounce some of these things here. He says, thank you very much for YouTube channel. I'll have to talk about that here briefly. Good videos, great graphics, nice topics, interesting approach to share your knowledge. Would be a stretch to say similar to Erlang Akka Actor Systems approaching their concept of supervision. Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing some of these systems, right, that have some of that brains built in because that's what we need for reliability. I mean, it's amazing to me. You and I are old enough to remember when it was very common for us to have these maintenance outages for 12 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours. The system's going to be down for maintenance. And now
Mhm.
you get one of those notices, and I don't know about you, but I flip a table. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. How can you be down for even more than like 30 seconds a minute? It's like you're kidding me, right? Like you're going to be read only for 48 hours? Do you not know how the cloud works?
Yeah. It's our perception is what
Right,
it is.
right.
This is why this is why, unfortunately, Nate, I think we a lot of times have to focus on responsiveness specifically because I mean, I know Google has published these numbers, but I believe it's uh, people now will notice a performance lag after, I believe the number is 400 milliseconds now.
Yeah.
That used to be about 2000 milliseconds. And it used to be that a couple of years ago, there was 1200 milliseconds that somebody would leave and go somewhere else. They'd leave a website if it wasn't first paint within 1200
Right.
milliseconds. That's 800 now. I mean, that's 800 milliseconds. That's so our expectations have gotten to this point.
Yes.
And when you said that about being down for 24 or 48 hours, I mean, you're right. It was incredulous when you said that, but this was our life
Yeah.
back in the day when,
Yeah.
oh yeah, database goes down every night for backup and
Right.
maintenance. And it's like, what?
One of the first big systems I worked on, our stated SLAs from our infrastructure people was 6 to 6 Central Time, Monday through Friday. That was all
Hmm.
they would guarantee us was 6 to 6,
Wow.
and that was acceptable for some definition of acceptable. Except here's the thing: I had a group of customers in London. London's +6 on the Central Time Zone, which meant for them the system wasn't guaranteed to be available till noon.
Hmm.
This was a system we used to track our investment portfolio. So I had investment advisors in the UK trying to make investment decisions and they couldn't get their data in a timely
Hmm.
fashion. I mean, it drove me nuts to say the least. But yeah, I don't know. Oh, we have Raju with us. Loosely Typed is hanging out. He's talking about deep
Hey,
learning.
Raju.
I was just talking to him over the weekend. I got some book recommendations, which I think ultimately came from you. So we'll get to that here before we break up. where we don't understand the algorithm to solve the problem. Yeah, we just know it did. That exactly, Raju.
There you
That's kind
go.
of what I'm talking about. It's one of these kind of frightening aspects of, oh man, what happens when the system makes a decision, the other interesting outcome is what happens when we become overly reliant on that system and we make a bad decision because we assume it's always 100% accurate, and then just got somebody killed. Yes, hello,
Wow.
Raju. Good to see you, my friend.
Yeah.
And then yes, trying to solve the same in direct interaction with PCs. Yeah, that's a whole nother question. Like, what is interaction with a computer going to look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? I think it's going to be very different than what you and I are used to.
Well, we all saw Minority Report, so
Yes.
there you go. I mean,
How those
retina
genes working out for
drawing.
you, Mr. Richards?
Yeah. It is fascinating to think about, though. It really is. Yeah.
I mean, it certainly has changed. I mean, you and I remember it's all used to be keyboard and a command line, and now how many times do you ask your phone a question and you
Yeah.
get mad when it doesn't understand exactly what you just said? It's like, wait,
Yeah.
what? That was something that even just 5 years ago would have been some crazy magic, and now we get upset when it misparses something.
Yeah.
You know, but to your point, expectations just continually move, and I honestly, I think, to get back to my one of my earlier questions, I think that's part of why there's been this renewed sort of emphasis on architecture, because what our customers expect from us has gotten so much harder than it was
Mm,
10 years ago, 20 years ago. You can't arrive at that accidentally, at least not well.
yeah. Well, and if you think about it too, Nate, back in the day, the monolithic architecture was really the king.
Yeah,
I mean, essentially it was always the de facto go-to due to Conway's law, and that's what we just went to build.
right.
And for a large part, though, that was probably the appropriate architecture, and it was okay,
Sure.
because there wasn't this need for the agility and responsiveness that we need now, the scalability that we need. If you think about banking apps, oh, take your normal banking apps. That was my first job outside of being an astronomer. My first job as an official programmer was at a bank, and I was working in the mainframe and COBOL code and all the technology that went in with that. But the interesting thing was, if you think about way back when I was first starting to program, we didn't have online banking, we
Right.
didn't have mobile banking. People actually physically went to the bank. There were tellers. And so you had a built in governor in those systems already
Right.
there. But now start with mobile banking or online banking. And now you've taken those systems that are used to having that governor of several thousand users concurrent. And now you're talking about several tens of thousands concurrent. These systems imploded. I
Right.
mean, and so the monolith worked fine. As a matter of fact, we teased about being down for 24 hours, or a database coming down every night. We laugh at that, but certainly I can make the argument there are still some systems in existence that shut off at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Workers go home and the system's not used because it's all internal from a
Right.
call center, for example. Sure, bring down the database. Yeah, bring everything down, put everything to idle state. Well, please don't, because then, as we know, when you bring down a machine, it doesn't always come back up.
Truth. Well, and to your point as well, Mark, it also changed the hour of operations, because by definition the bank was only open from 9 to 5 or whatever the proverbial banker's hours were.
Mhm.
Well, now if it's 10 o'clock at night and I want to pay a bill, I want to pay a bill. I don't want to wait until tomorrow morning. I'll forget, and now I'm going to
Yep.
get dinged with a late fee. So and my expectation is that that will work. And I see the same thing with lots of stuff. I'm sure this has happened to you. You're falling off to sleep and you're like, oh, that's right, I need to order X. And so you grab your iPad, your phone, bang, bang, and you rage order something right now.
Yeah.
If your favorite online retailer went, well, hang on, we're down for maintenance right now, this is outside our retail hours, you'd find a new online retailer.
You go somewhere else. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, here is one thing I'm always curious about. How did you get into software? What life choices led you to the point that you thought, playing with a computer was a good way to make a living?
My very first computer was a Timex Sinclair. Now, this didn't even have a monitor.
My
It
God,
was
you're
a
old.
membrane keyboard you hooked up to your TV. And I graduated from there to a VIC 20, the
Oh,
Commodore VIC 20, and then to the 64. I wrote my own games in BASIC. I actually, before computers even were around for us. My pocket calculator, and I'm trying to remember what it was. Matter of fact, I've got it in my room around the corner. It was one of these scientific calculators
yep.
that did all the calculations. So it was kind of like a computer in that way.
Hmm.
And I used to graph with that. I mean, I've always been, of course, into mathematics and
Sure.
chemistry and all these things, but it was really the advent of those initial computers with Commodore and all of these, and then later the Trash 80, and then you had the 8086 and the 8088, and oh yeah, I followed the trend all the way through. So, but it's interesting that you say that though, because I actually started college as a marine biologist. And
Yes.
so for 2 years, I studied biology, chemistry, and math and marine biology. And after a couple of years, I'm still passionate about marine biology. I love it. I wanted to really study coral reef formation. I love diving, all this kind of stuff. I love just the ocean.
Mhm.
However, I started to lose interest in all the chemistry I was taking, and some of the biology courses were just getting a little dry. And so my advisor, fortunately, who was actually the dean of the College of Biology at that point, noticed this. And so, being the great person he was, took me aside and said, Mark, looks like you're a little disillusioned about some of this. I'm like, I didn't know I'd have a chemistry major as well.
Right, right.
And anyways, and he said, look, he said, here's what's going to happen. And this was at the end of my sophomore year. He said, you're going to have to graduate from here with probably close to a 4.0. He said, you're going to go to one of two places, and that's either Scripps Institute in San Diego or Woods Hole here in Massachusetts, where I'm at. And he said, then you're going to spend a lot of money on that graduate degree. You're probably going to work for 10 years at J.C. Penney until a research position opens up. And I said, oh. And so at that point, I switched over to a mathematics degree
Huh.
with a computer science minor, and then ended up getting a master's degree in computer science. But it was really that interest had followed me since I was young, with
Sure.
all playing around with computers and writing my own games in BASIC. You know, those adventure games.
Yes.
You see a broom and a shovel. Which one do you pick up?
You're in a
You
room
wrote
with three
those.
doors.
Yeah. Which one do you enter? Those were fun to write. I tell you, I had a lot of fun with those. But that's really what kind of got me then into computers. And as a matter of fact, I started my career as an astronomer. I worked at Braeside Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona, looking for black holes, variable stars, binary star systems. Now there I was what was called an observational astronomer.
Okay.
That means you're sitting there looking through the telescope, or in our case, we were doing photometry. So we were gathering all the light from various stars, analyzing that light through different filters. But I still physically had to be in the observatory. And at that point, believe it or not, Nate, we actually had a hand crank that was on several gears to move the
Right.
dome.
Right.
So as the telescope is slewing to actually track a particular star, the dome slit has to move with it. And
Right.
we're sitting here cranking that. And so every couple of minutes, it's moving in a couple more notches. Well, that was the very first thing we actually did using computers. An Apple IIe, can you believe it or
Oh,
not, with C language to start automating the observatory.
sure.
Instead of having to sit there, it's like, I really have to go take a break, but I got to rotate the darn dome. So, anyways, so that was another astronomer and I. So we started hacking stuff together, and so that really started getting me interested in computers. And then we started automating the rotating of the filter on the telescope. Now we're talking a huge telescope,
Right.
but we had to actually manually rotate the filter to get in different light rays. And that was the second thing we automated. And so we would set up what's called a program Now, not what you and I would consider a program now, but the observing program for the night. And so then we automatically slewed the telescope. Nate, after a couple of years, we actually got to the point where we were actually downstairs in the warmth because Flagstaff is cold. It's about 7,000 foot elevation up in the snow in the mountains. We were actually downstairs in a nice heated room with all these monitors doing astronomy. And so, yeah, that's what really got me into to computers. But when I moved here to Massachusetts, well, the
Not a lot of
salary for an
astronomy in
astronomer,
Massachusetts.
not a lot of work. So that's what I said. I love doing this computer stuff, and that's actually what got me into computers.
Wow,
You know,
that's
from
very
a
cool.
professional
Sure.
standpoint. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I started as a chemistry major, so I can appreciate sort of your journey there. And I got into
Oh, yeah.
OChem, and I enjoyed chemistry. Chemistry is fun. I like making stuff, and I liked the compounds and everything. But the thing that sort of threw me off was if you make a mistake on step 27 of a chemical, reaction formula, whatever you want to call it, you got to start over, and then you have to dispose of that properly. And oh, and by the way, most of these are known carcinogens. And oh, by the way, if you spill this on your hand, you don't wear a glove, that acid will burn through your flesh almost instantly.
Hmm.
And I went, wait, with computers, I don't have to worry about they're going to give me cancer, and there's nothing to spill on my hands. And I make a mistake at line 54, I just fixed line 54. That seems like a better gig in many ways, and way you go. But I think that's a really good reminder for folks that there is no one path in this space.
Hmm.
And, every so often now you seem to hear these arguments about you must be a traditional if you don't have a traditional background in computer science. Well, a generation ago, there was no traditional computer science degree. I mean, my college, when I was there, we didn't even have a computer science major until I was, I think, a sophomore. So
Hmm.
much as you did a major with a minor, that's was the option available to me when I enrolled, which is part of why I didn't go into it because I didn't want to do a
That's right.
math major. I wanted to do computer science, and had to wait basically. So there's a lot of paths, and a lot of people have gotten to this in different ways.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's more direct now. You're right. And when I went to high school, there was no computers. I took a class called Boolean algebra, and that was the closest we had. And I loved that class. But yeah, even the university I went to, it wasn't until towards my senior year
Right.
where we actually got a computer science major, and
Mm.
it was always under engineering or under mathematics, which is what I combined it with. But kind of interesting though, because it was more about teaching the theory
Yes.
rather than let's program up this application. And we did our share of programming, of course, but it was all in assembler.
Right. Right.
And a little bit of Prolog and a little bit of Ops 5 thrown in and a little bit of Pascal towards the end. Those were the languages
Really
that we
higher level
covered in.
languages as you went along there, all the way to Pascal.
I know, huh? Can you believe it? Heresy.
I remember, so I ended up having to take some of my computer science classes out of order just because of where I was at already and where the semester was at. And so I ended up taking like a higher level computer science course before I took the lower level intro one. And so I remember being in the lower level intro one and having to do this assignment. And I looked at my teacher and I said, Lynn, I can do this in like 5 lines of whatever it was. And he says, yeah, but pretend you don't know that yet. I'm like, oh, okay. So forget about the right way to do this. He's like, yeah, yeah. I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, fine.
Yep.
Oh, it's good times, good time. It's funny you talk about the high school thing. So my son will go to high school next year, and so we've been looking at a couple different high school options, and that is one of the big reflections that I noticed from
Mm,
when I was in school, where we had a computer lab where there were computers, but that was it. They were basically restricted to that one
sure.
room. Now all the kids are carrying around either Chromebooks or MacBook Airs, and it's like, oh yeah, it's a little different world. And then you think, okay, what's it going to look like? My eventual grandchildren, very different
Yeah.
world.
Oh, yeah.
Sweet Killer says he studied Pascal as well during high school, so we got that going for us.
Yeah.
Lumjacker says hi. Hello, Lumjacker. Pleasure to see you. Uh, what is your opinion on reactive web frameworks like WebFlux? They seem to be more performant. There are opinions that they're more complex than other frameworks. I mean, is that just part of the trade-off? So that if I want this more sort of performance system, or I have that need, because not all systems have that need, I'm going to need to trade that off for potentially some more complexity.
Mm. I think it is. I think it is. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Although I'm familiar with all of these, I actually about, I guess it was close to maybe about 7 years ago, probably maybe 7 plus. I made the conscious choice to start backing away from UI development. You'll know exactly, for those of you who do UI development, exactly when this was. This was the time when you woke up in the morning and there was a new web framework announced. And you would spend the first half hour of the morning understanding what it was and how it differed. And of course, it didn't.
Right.
And it became, at one point, I think I counted over 40. And I'm like, it was getting too difficult. It was getting too hard to get my head around with doing other things as an
Right.
architect. I mean, we have to focus a lot on our technical breadth. And I was starting to lose all that. And I'm having to say, wait, I don't want to be a UI developer. I love UI. I love doing it, but I also want to do architecture. I also want to do services. I want to do back end stuff. I love dabbling in databases. And so anyways, it started to get so specialized, Nate, that I said, no, I'm tapping out. I'm going to leave this to the experts. So yeah, but I do know just from my own personal experience and those of the teams I work with that it's a trade-off, because
Yeah.
they do hide a lot of the complexity, especially reactive frameworks. I mean, which, at least in my humble opinion, I try to see things simply, and which is really a grandiose implementation of the observer pattern. But I know I'm oversimplifying something that's fairly complex, but I think that's what these frameworks do, which is
Sure.
great until the classic last 10% trap, until you need to do something that, now you're writing extensions, you're starting to go around the framework. And also just from the monolithic UI standpoint, which I'm not a big fan, by the way, of monolithic UIs, not necessarily to the micro front end piece, but I love domain-based user interfaces. And a lot of times the frameworks start getting in the way when you start to modularize your user interface. So a lot of the patterns I used to really like writing user interfaces in, for example, microkernel with plugins. Sure. Wait, in the UI? Absolutely. But really hard to do with some of the reactive frameworks, with even
Sure.
any sort of web UI framework. So yeah, so I have some strongly opinions loosely held on those things. Yes.
I think that's the right way to approach almost anything in technology. A strong opinion, loosely held. And I don't know who first coined that phrase. I don't know who we want to give credit to there. I remember something, I made some statement and someone said, hey, where did you get that from? And I said, well, I'm pretty sure I got this from Stein. And then Stein said, I'm pretty sure I got this from so-and-so. And this ended up going back to about 8 or 10 different people, where someone's like, well, I don't think I'm the first person to say, so I'm sure, the same kind of genealogy here, but
Yeah.
that does lead me to an interesting question. I know one of the classic bits of advice in your amazing book, I might as well, it's right next to me here, because of course it is.
Well, it better be.
Well, I mean, I use this with my grad students, but if you don't know that Mark
Oh,
and
yeah.
Neil wrote this book, then you should just really go add it to your bookshelf. Thank you very much. Um, One of the bits in there that I think is really key, you talk about, is an architect, you need to be, breadth, not depth. You need to know that there are 4 or 5 different UI frameworks, but not necessarily be an expert in any one of them. How do you keep up in this industry where, to your point, hey, I woke up this morning, there's a new JavaScript framework. How do
Yeah.
you, what tips, tricks, techniques do you use to try to, stay relevant in that vein?
Yeah. So I have sources that are near and dear to me. 3 in particular. I'm always on InfoQ, infoq.com. As a matter of fact, this first place I ever published a book was on InfoQ. It was their first book on transactions. But also dzone ref cards,
Uh,
super useful for just getting a glimpse of something without having to dive into it. And it's nicely formatted, so you're getting the right information, kind of as an architect. What is the core difference between React JS and Angular JS? That's what I want to know as an architect. I don't need to necessarily know how to code really well in each of those, but I
right.
do need to know how they differ. What are those differences? What are the trade-offs between the two? And these are good sources. And obviously, the ThoughtWorks technology radar that Neil helps create and analyze. But here's what I do, Nate, and I do have a tip that I use, and this works really well for everybody else listening. Is I call it my 20-minute rule, because first thing in the morning, I'll get that blessed cup of coffee or tea, but before I check email, because that's when your day is completely over, I spend 20 minutes. I go into InfoQ. I'll go and I'll have heard a buzzword. Somebody I was talking to spoke about Spectre, and I'm like, what in the world is that? Now it happened, and I just threw that out. But these are things where it's like, I write it down. I write down so much that I don't hear, and then I go and research it. But minimum of 20 minutes a day, and that's how I kind of keep up. It's not enough. I try to do more, and especially in today's pandemic world, it's a lot easier to do the 20-minute rule because I'm not commuting anywhere.
Right.
I'm not commuting. I'm not hopping an airplane or driving to a client. And so that's the way I maintain that technical breadth. And it works pretty well, by the way. You start to get more familiar with buzzwords as people say them.
Yeah, I refer to that as the morning coffee rule. And, it's
There
something
you
that I
go.
didn't even realize was something people did until I was on a panel with you and you mentioned it. And I went, wow, I do the same damn thing. Like, and I used to get, like, back when I had a real job, I'd get all these newsletters and I would spend that first half an hour in the day just kind of going through them. And I actually had, this goes all the way back to when we had to use Lotus Notes as our primary storage thing. I would post, I think every day, here are the 4 or 5 things I found that I thought were interesting for my team to look at. And
Yeah.
I did that for years, and never even thought twice about it. And then now you kind of look back and you go, oh, yeah, morning coffee. That's a good way of phrasing that. So I know
Yeah.
I borrowed
Yeah.
that concept from you, at least, well, the phrase morning coffee.
I like
Uh,
that though, because that more describes the timing of doing that. Because if
right.
you wait till lunchtime or the evening, it's like Duolingo. If you
Yeah.
don't do it in the morning, you won't do it.
Yeah. The day gets away
It
from you.
escapes you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Sweet Killer Six also says it's an awesome book, and he's absolutely right. I'm a big fan. I was
Awesome.
when I got tapped to teach the architecture class at the U this past fall. I'm like, all right, we're adding this book because I knew I needed to have that on the agenda there. I wanted to use front end development, studied Angular, knowing the basic HTML, CSS. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, to your point, and this is something we've talked about before.
Mhm.
Software has gotten so much more specialized today than it used to be. To your point, when you and I first started programming, we did everything. We
Oh,
were
we
the
did it
UI
all.
designer, we were the database designer, we were everything. And now all of those bits, this is why I get so irritated when people talk about the full stack developer who knows everything soup to nuts. There is no individual who is an expert at 3 or 4 UI frameworks, 3 or 4 databases, 3 or 4 server side languages. Oh, and don't forget DevOps and SRE, and don't forget cloud, and don't forget resiliency and everything else. That person doesn't exist. Now, you might be better at one piece or the other, obviously, but there has to be a certain amount of specialization.
Oh yeah.
Any thoughts on that? I mean, I see that as inevitable, just with again that rise of complexity and what
Oh
the
yeah.
expectations people have of a system.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we agree too much, Nate, because yes, I I have observed that, oh, maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago, 12 years ago. I really started to accept that that quote full stack developer is either uh, the superstar that you must hire, and they're probably the best programmer in the entire world,
You're going to pay them
or
a lot.
and you pay them a lot, or there's somebody who knows, as you said, a little bit about everything, which is also still valuable. But
Mm,
yes, I concur. I think we're highly specialized. And it's, again, what it points to is that whole thing about complexity now.
right.
As a matter of fact, I'm sure that you have seen this in your travels. Isn't it interesting the titles of architects that's starting to emerge? Domain architect is understandable because just the advent of domain driven design and microservices really lends itself towards that kind of architect as the service owner for that domain. But how about this one, cloud architect? That one I have been seeing so
Yeah.
much. And every time I say, really, so what do you do? And it's pretty bad as an architect with 26 years under my belt as an architect, teaching architecture
Right,
and
right.
doing architecture, having to ask, what do you do?
What would you say you do around here?
What would you say
I do
to
cloud.
do cloud? But I mean, I understand the need for that specialization. But again, here we are talking about specialization. And I think things have gotten so complex in the UI space. It's almost necessary to be specialized in that area. And when we start talking about databases, well, are you talking about NoSQL? Well, what kind of NoSQL? Are you talking about name key value? Are you talking about a graph? Are you talking about a columnar? Maybe it's a document. What do you mean?
What about a
Uh,
time series database?
yeah, or time series, or well, we're going to cluster that. What do you mean cluster a database? Yeah, I mean it's the same thing. It's gotten so complex, and now we have new SQL, NEW SQL, which is right down in between. And the I don't know if you've opened up the hood on new SQL, but it's a fascinating technology. How do you stay relational, yet gain so much of that scalability and sheer raw throughput that a NoSQL database does? And it's through shards, it's through clusters and sharding, and it's quite amazing, the technology. I would highly advise all of you to dip into it. Just Google new SQL. There's about, I guess, close to almost 30 databases now. It's probably more that implement new SQL technology. But yeah, so it's specialized. It's all the way down. It's
You and I are old enough to be able to say we had both kinds of databases. We had IMS and we had DB2. What else is there?
That's right. That was it. Well, I had three. I had ISAM, but
You are
so
older than me, to be fair.
there we
So
go.
that's to be fair. Older and maybe wiser. Now, I've already discussed your existing book, but my understanding is you and Neil are not ones to rest on your laurels. How are we
Oh,
coming with the hard parts of architecture? Because obviously the easy stuff, everybody knows that. So tell me how we're coming on the next. Is it a
oh.
sequel? Are we calling it a sequel?
No, not really. It's a follow-on book. Yeah, this is. I'm so excited about this. As a matter of fact, our draft is due in 2 months, and so this is what I spend most of my time with. But yeah, this is where we're taking a different approach than we kind of did with the fundamentals of software architecture, and really bifurcating this book into really focusing on distributed architecture and primarily pulling things apart and all the various topics related to pulling things apart, and then correspondingly putting them back together. I mean, we talk about architecture decomposition, modularity, how patterns for decomposition, granularity of services. How big should they be? How small should they be? How do you pull apart analytical data when we're talking about that non-operational stuff? And then how do you glue them back together? Workflows, transactional sagas, contract management, uh, just different communication patterns. And so we're really kind of part one is pulling it apart, part two, putting it together. And it's a lot of, we're going pretty deep on this one, but these are all the things that are hard in architecture. And so we're very, very excited about this. And our cover's out, as a matter of fact. We, everybody wonders what your O'Reilly animal is going to be, but we'll be unveiling that in our on our website probably as soon as it's kind of officially
Okay.
approved. But so I'm not sure I'm allowed to say our animal yet in case it does change. But let me just say I have seen it. I have seen the cover, and it's such a cool animal. It really is. So I will tell you though, my friend Neil, he had recommended a dragon because he
Oh,
said we're slaying dragons here.
sure.
Well, unfortunately,
You don't
O'Reilly
do
deals with
mythical
turtles
animals?
and doves and not dragons. But it's
Ah,
not a dragon, which would
darn.
have been cool. But yeah, that'll be coming out this summer. And
Awesome.
it's a great follow on to our fundamentals book about, wow, that was great. Where can I go for the next step? And this is kind of the next step, the hard stuff. And not to say that the fundamentals isn't hard, but it's fundamentals. It's really that transition from developer to architect. So yeah, we're really looking forward to the release of this book this summer. So
Well, and I think to your point, one of the ways that both you and Neil have discussed is architect is architecture, those things you can't Google. You know, you can Google how do I do X in Angular, how do I solve Y in Java, you know, or in C sharp, whatever. It's really hard to do that when the answer to so many of the things we run into is, well, it depends.
sure,
Depends
yep,
on what? Well, it
exactly.
depends on this, that, and the other thing. Well, how do you, you know, okay, well, that's again, we're having that experience. Having failed on that project 10 years ago gives you that scar tissue of, well, never going to do that again. You know, and
Yep.
I think that's part of, you know, what makes this job so hard is, you know, you there is no tutorial,
Mhm.
right? There is no this just here, build this to-do list, and now you've got enough to know how to architect it. It's there's more to it than that.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So I want to switch gears because I've been staring at your wall on Zoom calls for the last almost year. What's up with these stringed instruments? And since I don't know enough about stringed instruments, I don't know if those are fiddles, I don't know if those are violins, I don't know if those are viol. One is clearly larger than the others.
Yeah.
What's up with your
Uh,
instrumentation there?
well, I've got three fiddles, I've got a baritone uke, and a guitar. And unfortunately, I've got a small office because there's also two desks in here, three computers. So unfortunately, I literally and amps and all that. I literally ran out of space, and so I'm hanging things up now.
Checks out.
But yeah, so no, the top one is my the good old Andre Eastman rustic fiddle. The one below is kind of an interesting one. I love this one. This is an electric fiddle.
So cool.
So this hooks up to an amp, or actually, I've got an interesting story about this. So it's got its own receiver piece here. But the original reason I got this, Nate, was because when I practice upstairs here, my entire family puts on earmuffs and goes outside. And so not that I'm bad, but you know, it's loud. Violins are
Right.
loud. I used to go to hotel rooms. I'd bring my fiddle with me all the time. And I would get
Noise
complaints from the front
complaints.
desk because a violin is actually loud. So that's why I got this, because I hook up an earplug here. And so I put it just, you know, wired. And
Sure.
so now I can play and no one hears, you know, it's very, very soft, but I
Yeah.
hear the full music
Ah,
and I can hook it up to an amp. It's really cool. Yeah. Dropkick Murphys is what I play on this guy.
nice.
Yep. Shipping up to Boston. But I also got a really cool one. This I picked up. It's called a Cricket. This is what we call a 1700s player fiddle. So this is actually the fiddle that players in the 1700s used to basically put them on the back
Sure.
and walk around. It's nice and thin. I love the sound off of this thing. But reason I got this, it travels so nicely. We got a nice case for it. It's not, you know, it's not a big case. But yeah, so this I used to take this to work with me, as a matter of fact. But the other thing that you see up there is actually that's a baritone uke,
Okay.
and that also that was gifted to me by a development team I worked with several years ago, and I taught most of them guitar. As a matter of fact, we started a band at work.
No.
Now, here's the name of it. Are you ready? The Java Strings. All right, but that truly was the name of our band, and we used to
It's
play
like the null
every.
pointers.
It's like the no pointers, yes, exactly. But I had my guitar, and it was getting cumbersome because it's a huge dreadnought to take back and forth.
Sure.
And so my team gifted me the baritone uke you see there, which is really nice. The sound is beautiful, steel strings, the whole bit.
Is there a difference between a fiddle and a violin?
Yes, as a
Okay.
matter of fact, Nate, here's the difference between a fiddle and a violin. A fiddle has beer stains.
Ah, oh, okay. That checks out.
That is the
That checks
difference.
out.
It's an old joke because
Yeah.
I do play the fiddle, but the difference is it's the exact same instrument as the style of play.
Okay.
The fiddle is usually where you're doing, for example, Irish hornpipes or jigs, contra music, this sort of thing. That's a style of play that's called the fiddle. But if I were to break into, for example, Vivaldi or something, uh, or playing a symphony, that's the violin. but
Okay.
it's the same instrument. It's just how you play it.
Sure.
Yeah. But that's an old joke from the pubs is basically, yeah, a fiddle has beer stains. That's the difference.
Checks out. Checks out. It's like inheritance versus composition or something. There's got to be a joke in there.
That's right.
I had a little back and forth on Twitter about that over I think Friday, something along those lines.
Yeah.
But it's neither here nor there. It's fascinating to me how many folks in technology also have that sort of musical bent. I mean, I don't. I can barely hum. But it's always fascinating to me just how many people also, and I am always amazed at musical talent. People who have it, they don't just play one instrument; they play like seven, and
Mhm.
very different instruments. Like I get it if violin versus this versus that, if it's all kind of the same concept. But when you play things that are so divergent, it just always blows my brain.
There is such a direct correlation. If I mean, I've noticed this my whole life. If you go into any development shop, you look at a team of developers, there's a good probability at least one, if not more, plays some sort of instrument. Obviously,
Hmm.
typically the guitar, but might be piano, might be keyboards. But yeah, it's there is a mathematically this correlation between music and mathematics, and obviously computer science and mathematics. I mean, programming deals with mathematics. And so there is this connection in the brain I've read about that makes an association between music and the ability to play music, and
Sure.
also math and computers.
Well,
Yeah.
it's funny. The first place I worked at a school, out of college, one of their claims to fame, so to speak, was they built this training course, this boot camp, we would call it today, where they would take people who had sort of that programming bent and turn them into developers. And one of their
Yeah.
most infamous graduates was a PhD in music, and that person was pretty well regarded inside the software development side of the house, as a PhD in music. So we talk about non-traditional ways of getting into coding. There you go. We got a doctorate and then became a
Yeah.
programmer, so nature of the beast. So
But of
it's
course, my room pales in comparison. I was on a video call with Rich Hickey,
yes.
who big
Yes.
culture, and his
That was
backdrop. I
embarrassing.
mean, he
There
has
were several
dozen guitars,
guitars and
at least eight
amps.
guitars, 4 amps. I mean, it was like, is that all yours, or do you run a music studio? And I was like,
And
it's
and
all
then there was the
his.
headphone collection.
Yes.
My son
So
would be very jealous.
this pales in comparison to
Yes. Yes.
most rooms. Yes.
Exactly. Exactly. But Sweet Killer 9 talks about, always recommend doing other stuff behind besides tech. Couldn't agree more. I do think we get a little
Always.
too caught up in that. It's important to have interests that are outside of banging on a keyboard. You don't have to live and breathe this 24/7. In fact, I think it's vital that you have some other interests that stretch your
Gives your
brain.
brain a break.
Yeah,
It really
exactly.
does. Your brain
Exactly.
needs a break,
Yep.
and you do as well. And I think that that's a really good observation. That
Hmm.
doing something outside of your field really really does help. I'm still an amateur astronomer. I own a telescope, and this is another. I got into astrophotography, which I should share some of my photos sometime out on my website. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So are there any, we've been living in this pandemic world now for a year. My son and I were talking about that this morning because he's basically like, yeah, Dad, it's been a year since I've been, in full-time learning and in school. And are there any habits that you've picked up that you're hoping continue post-pandemic, or are you just, once this is over, I'm going to forget it ever happened and, burn it down?
Well, I think as most everybody, you kind of have to adjust your life and get a different routine going.
Yeah.
Nate, you and I, our routine was we're home basically to make sure that we still have kids and pack up for our next trip.
Do
I
the
mean,
keys still
literally.
work? Yep. Okay, good.
Yeah, yeah. Now your name again was,
You look familiar.
but certainly, we've all had to kind of adjust our uh, the way we run our daily lives and kind of organize our day and stuff. I think what the pandemic has shown to me, I loved, like you. I was traveling almost every week,
Yeah.
internationally, locally, and I loved it. Oh man, we could talk about cities that we miss and
Yes.
all this, but
Yes.
I really enjoy being at home. I've appreciated that, and that's going to change my lifestyle. moving forward, once flights do open up and we're free to travel, I'm not going to be traveling as much because that's one thing that has changed, and
Yeah.
something that I've really appreciated is just, you know, we've gardens everywhere around our house and I never see them. I mean, the flowers come and go, and all of a sudden I'll come back from a long trip in Europe and I was like, where are the flowers? And like, oh, they already bloomed. I'm like, I missed them again.
Yeah.
Little things, the little kind of things I really appreciate. Kind of spending some time at home. Um, my office is comfortable. I've learned, by the way, that's something that will change, Nate. I've learned to appreciate when we're in this, I got to be comfortable. I got to have the right kind of equipment. I think that's going to follow me. By the
Sure.
way, I'm no longer going to be dealing with a rickety chair at work or a 14-inch monitor that they
No.
happen to find in the back room. It's like, no, I'll bring my own 32-inch monitor. Thank you.
Well,
I
it's
got spoiled with that.
oh no, I mean, so I've been remote for 4 years now. I think I just had my 4 year anniversary, and so this wasn't as big of a switch, other than the fact that I haven't gotten on an airplane now in more than a year. But
You know,
when my wife started working from home, that's her desk over my shoulder. She just took like one of our kitchen chairs and kind of adjusted a little bit, put like a cushion on it. And it's taken almost a year for me to basically convince her that we need to get you a real chair. And so
that's
that
right.
finally showed up last week, and I set it up for her over the weekend. So she finally has a decent chair. I couldn't quite get her to go all the way to you want the good super adjustable, but at least it's better than literally our dining room chair. So, but to your point, yeah, you get so used to that. It's like, no, I'm this is how I need it now. And I do think it's going to be really interesting to see what in-person events look like in a year. And do we do as many of those? Is it more the virtual things? I think especially for user groups, there's a huge advantage to that, in the sense that you can go to the Barcelona user group if you want to, if that works better for your schedule and the topic
Yeah.
is what you want to see. I still think there's a lot that's missed by not having that in-person connection to be able to catch up with a friend, or, just those adjacent possible bumping into somebody and, oh, you're having that problem. Oh, so am I. Let's talk.
That, Nate, is the reason for my prediction that once online events do, or I'm sorry, once in-person events do start, um, those conferences and groups will sell out,
Yes.
because not only us as speakers get frustrated with the virtual experience, but I feel, and I've also heard this from folks, that even from the receiving end, it's like, I cannot sit there and watch another video, even if it's live,
Right.
it's a
Right.
video. And I think, at least my perception is, people are starving for the in-person experience again. It's got to be safe,
Yeah.
but I think it's going to be big once it kicks back up, because of that
Yeah.
reason that we've missed it for so long.
Well, it's screen fatigue. I think we
Yes.
are all just hungry for that
Hmm.
connection again. And like my son, again, his birthday was yesterday. Well, Friday night we had a virtual birthday party for him, where he and his friends watched a show together on Disney Plus with the follow along, whatever it's called. And then they had a hangout or whatever, and they were chatting back and forth. And while that's better than having no connection at all,
Yeah.
it's not the same. And I mean, I haven't had anybody over to the house for a grill session now in since 2019, and like, I desperately miss having my friends over, and I
Yeah.
desperately miss hanging out with you in real physical space somewhere. And so I think, boy, once that the vaccine gets spread, once we've kind of got that herd immunity, oh boy, places are going to be packed to the rafters,
Yeah.
which will probably have a whole bunch of other, interesting side effects. The flu season next year will probably be nuts, but yeah, I can't wait.
Who knows?
Along those lines, where's the first place you want to go? Where are you just itching to get back to? I mean,
Well,
we could
the
spend
first
an hour talking about cities, but
That's true, but I noticed we are out of time. But yeah, so the first place I want to go, or probably am going, the first place I would want to go, two places. My favorite cities that I've traveled to: Barcelona, and of course, Ireland. And so those are two places that I terribly, terribly miss, and my fiddle misses it desperately as well. Not so much in Barcelona, though, by the way.
Right.
But yeah, the first place I'm probably going to travel, Nate, is Nick's Software Design and Development in London in November.
Mm,
And I think that's far enough into the future
sure.
that I there's a high probability that will actually be live, but that will
Sure.
probably be my first in-person conference in almost 2 years of that point. At that point, so that I have high expectations for, and I also miss Gordon Ramsay's, and I miss Chef Claire, and
Oh,
Robichaud's, and
yeah.
all of the gang.
Yeah, that's the one that hurts me. I haven't eaten at Core in now almost 2 years, and it makes me sad. But no, I think
No,
the UK is high on my list, as is Barcelona. There's no getting around that.
yeah,
But fingers
yeah.
crossed we get to do that again. Although as Raju said, not looking forward to jumping on planes as often. And I do think it'll be interesting to see, do we go back to that lifestyle of, like,
We'll
I
see.
mean, I flew to Paris for a day once, and I don't know if that's ever going to happen again. I don't know. I don't know. Different world, different
This will
world.
be interesting to see what happens, Nate, because you are probably more traveled than, well, I don't know. I think it's probably a tie between you and Venkat, but it's probably close.
I'm
But
closer to him than I ever thought I would be.
I don't know if those are bragging rights or whether you should cry.
Cry for help. It's a cry for help.
It's a cry for help. I was asked that same question last night, as a matter of fact, and not formally, it's with a friend, had asked me that, and my response was, I don't know.
Hmm.
But once I start traveling, I don't know if I'm going to get the bug again, because the opportunities are there. It's just
Right.
whether I want to take those, or whether I'm going to say, I kind of am probably going to do half because I like being at home. I,
Right.
I can't predict it. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, one thing that I'm very thankful for last year is I played a lot more golf because I wasn't on airplanes for 400 plus hours a
Mm,
year. Rode my bike a lot more. I've been doing a lot of bike riding this winter on the trainer. I think I've got over 700 miles in this year already, and because it's right there, it's in the basement. I rode before I got on this call today, because it's right there. It's easy to do. That's a lot harder when you're in a hotel or you're, red-eyed
yeah.
in somewhere and tired and whatnot. So I don't know, but I miss going these places. So it'll be
Yeah.
fascinating to see what 2022, I guess, probably is when things will really start to normalize. But
You know
anyway,
what's going to be funny, Nate? I just was thinking about all these wonderful Michelin star restaurants. However, we have probably, through this pandemic, created the next generation of the best chefs in the world. And because,
sure,
you know, pasta and meat sauce only carries you so far. And that's great for the first month of the pandemic.
right?
But after the last year, it's like, can we spice this up a bit? And
Yeah,
even I have been branching out on a lot of creativity with my meals. And so the question is this: have our expectations, are they going to be raised because we have been having such creative,
sure.
good meals at home that all of a sudden we're going to go to a restaurant? It's like, nah,
What's
I can do a
this?
better job than this.
Well, I mean, to your point, I fell victim to this bread bug probably 2 months
Oh,
ago or so. Once the winter kind of kicked in and I couldn't do outdoor stuff, I figured, well, all right, I might as well see what this bread thing's all about. Started playing around with that. And the downside is once you start baking fresh bread, your family starts demanding fresh bread. So, you get on this cycle of every few days. All right, I guess I better make another round of bread. But,
mm-hmm.
zeroth world problems. So.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
my friend, I could talk to you for another hour, but I know you
Yes.
have other things to do, and it's lunchtime for me in my part of the world, so I should probably go find something to eat. I don't know what Christine's trying something new for lunch today, so I'm excited to see what she
Ah,
whipped up. But
case in point. See,
right,
there we go.
right, exactly. Well, thank you so much. I'm very excited for the follow-on book, The Hard Parts. So please do, let everyone know when that comes out. I'll do everything I can to help promote that. But
Oh yeah.
I cannot recommend the precursor book, your original book. My students enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. There's a lot of times I was reading through it and being in violent agreement with you and Neil. So thank you for putting that down
Yeah.
onto paper. So. All right. Well, my friend, thank you so much
All
for
right.
hanging out with me. I appreciate it. You have a great
Yeah,
week, and
it's been
hopefully
a
the weather's
wonderful
starting to
talk.
get warmer. It's a pleasure as always, buddy. And
Yeah.
I think
Yep.
I'll be on our Friday call by the looks of it. So last week was the birthday party,
Awesome.
so I didn't have a choice there. But all right. Well,
Good.
thank you again. And next
All
week,
right.
Speaking of old white no fluff guys, Ken Sipe, the Ken Sipe sighting. I'll actually have Ken. I have a funny story about Ken at a conference a couple years ago. Both he and I arriving at a hotel at around the same time, so I'm excited to share that story.
Yeah.
Thank you again, my friend. I appreciate it.
I know
Cheers.
that one too.
Yeah, you do.